The stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of the weathered wooden platform, and Beatrice Owens pressed her gloved hand against the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Old Tucson, Arizona sprawled before her in the late afternoon sun of 1878, all dusty streets and false-fronted buildings that seemed to shimmer in the heat. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston to meet a man who had answered her advertisement, a man who had written kind letters about his cattle ranch and the life they could build together, but who had never once asked for her photograph. That should have been her first clue that he knew, somehow, what her family had spent 24 years telling her. She climbed down from the coach with as much dignity as she could muster, her plain brown traveling dress already dusty despite her best efforts. The other passengers barely glanced her way as they hurried off to their destinations, and Beatrice was grateful for their disinterest. She had learned long ago that attention usually meant cruelty, especially from strangers who took one look at her angular face, her too wide mouth, her nose that had been broken when she was 12 and never set properly, and decided she was worth less than nothing. Her older sister Margaret had been the beauty of the family, with delicate features and golden curls that caught the light like spun honey. Margaret had married at 19 to a wealthy merchant and now lived in a fine house with servants and silk curtains. Beatrice's younger sister Charlotte had inherited their mother's elegant bone structure and had been engaged since she was 17. But Beatrice, plain Beatrice, had been told since childhood that she should be grateful for whatever she could get, that no respectable man would want her for anything but her passable cooking skills and her ability to keep a clean house. "You are not a beauty, Beatrice," her mother had said on the morning she left Boston, her voice neither cruel nor kind, just matter of fact. "You must understand that this cowboy, this Mr. Kendrick Ellison, is likely taking you as a mail-order bride because he cannot find anyone else. Do not expect romance or tender words. Do your duty as a wife, keep his home, and perhaps he will treat you with basic kindness. That is the best you can hope for." Beatrice had nodded and packed her trunk with her few belongings, her mother's words settling over her like a familiar, suffocating blanket. She had long ago stopped arguing when people called her plain, or worse. What was the point? Mirrors did not lie, and neither did the turned heads and pitying glances she had endured for more than 2 decades. The platform was nearly empty now, and Beatrice scanned the street for a tall man in a cowboy hat. That was all the description Kendrick had given her in his letters. She clutched her carpetbag tighter and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. What if he took one look at her and sent her back on the next stage? What if he had been expecting someone different, someone prettier, despite never asking for her likeness? "Miss Owens?" She turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed to have been carved from the Arizona landscape itself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn hat. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-green, like water over river stones, and they were looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Not disgust, which she had expected. Not pity, which she had dreaded. Something else entirely. "Mr. Ellison?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, crinkling the corners of those remarkable eyes. "Call me Kendrick, please. Or Ken, if you prefer." He reached for her carpetbag, his movements easy and unhurried. "How was your journey? 3 weeks on a stage cannot have been comfortable." "It was fine," Beatrice said, though her back still ached from the endless jostling, and her skin felt grimy, despite washing at every stop. "Thank you for meeting me." Kendrick lifted her trunk from where the driver had deposited it with her other bags, hoisting the heavy weight onto his shoulder as though it weighed nothing at all. "I have a wagon just down the street. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I hope you do not mind, but I thought we could marry tomorrow morning at the church here in Old Tucson, then head home. Unless you need more time, of course. I do not want to rush you." Beatrice swallowed hard. Tomorrow. She would be married tomorrow to this stranger with the kind eyes and the easy smile. "Tomorrow is fine," she managed. They walked toward a sturdy wagon hitched to two horses, and Kendrick loaded her belongings into the back with practiced efficiency. Then he turned to her, and for the first time, he really looked at her, his gaze traveling over her face with an attention that made her want to turn away, to hide. She braced herself for disappointment, for the moment when he realized what he had gotten himself into. Instead, he said, "You are beautiful." Beatrice blinked. "What?" "You are beautiful," Kendrick repeated, and he said it as though he meant it, as though it were simply a fact like the sky being blue or the sun being hot. "I am glad you came all this way. I know it was a long journey." She felt her cheeks burn, and not from the Arizona sun. "You do not need to say such things, Mr. Ellison. I am aware of what I look like. My mother made certain I understood the situation before I left Boston." Something flickered in his expression, something that might have been anger, but not at her. "What situation is that?" "That I am plain, that you are likely marrying me out of necessity rather than choice, that I should not expect pretty words or romantic notions." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, defensive and sharp. "I can cook and clean and manage a household. I will work hard. You do not need to pretend I am something I am not." Kendrick was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the side of the wagon. Then he said very gently, "Miss Owens, I do not know what people have told you back in Boston, but I meant what I said. You are beautiful. I am not pretending anything." Beatrice looked away, unable to bear the earnestness in his voice. He was being kind, she told herself. Kind the way people sometimes were to the unfortunate, offering false compliments like charity. She should be grateful he was willing to go through with the marriage at all. "Thank you," she said quietly, and climbed up onto the wagon seat before he could say anything else. The ride through Old Tucson gave Beatrice her first real look at the town that would be her home. It was rougher than Boston, certainly, with its saloons and general stores and the ever-present dust that seemed to coat everything. But there was a kind of raw honesty to it that she found oddly appealing. No one pretended to be something they were not here. The buildings were plain and functional. The people were weathered by sun and wind, and everything seemed to exist for a purpose rather than for show. Kendrick pointed out landmarks as they drove. The church where they would marry, the general store where she could order supplies, the schoolhouse where the ranchers' children learned their letters. He spoke easily, not seeming to mind her silence, and Beatrice found herself relaxing slightly despite her nervousness. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked finally, forcing herself to make conversation. 5 years now. I came out from Kansas after my father died and left me a bit of money. Not much, but enough to buy land and start a herd." He glanced at her, his expression open. "It has been good land to me. The cattle thrive here, and I have been able to expand slowly. But it is lonely work, running a ranch by yourself. That is why I answered your advertisement." "You could have married someone from town," Beatrice said. "Surely there are women in Old Tucson who would have been happy to marry a rancher with his own land." Kendrick was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a deep rut in the road. "I did not want someone who already knew everyone's business and had expectations about who I should be. I wanted someone who would see the life I am building and decide if she wanted to be part of it. Someone who would not judge me by my family name or how much money I have in the bank." He looked at her again, and that smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Your letters were honest. You did not pretend to be someone you were not. I appreciated that." Beatrice felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot she had been carrying since Boston. "My letters were honest because I had nothing to lose," she admitted. "No one in Boston wanted me. This was my last chance at having any kind of life beyond being my sister's spinster relative who helps mind their children." "Then I am glad you took that chance," Kendrick said simply. They left the town behind and headed out into open country, where the landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, all red rock and scrubby vegetation, and a sky so vast it made Beatrice feel dizzy. She had never seen anything like it. Boston had been all narrow streets and tall buildings, everything pressed close together. Here there was space to breathe, space to think, space to be something other than the ugly sister who did not quite fit. The ranch came into view as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible. It was not a grand place, but it was solid and well maintained. A ranch house with a wide porch, a barn, several outbuildings, and corrals where cattle moved lazily in the evening heat. Beatrice could see why Kendrick was proud of it. This was a working ranch, a real home, built by his own hands and determination. "It is not fancy," Kendrick said as he helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady on her waist. "But it is sturdy, and the roof does not leak, and I think you will find it comfortable enough." "It is wonderful," Beatrice said, and meant it. He carried her bags inside, and Beatrice followed, taking in the main room with its stone fireplace and simple furniture. Everything was clean, but clearly lacking a woman's touch. No curtains on the windows, no decorations on the walls, just the bare necessities of living. A table and chairs, a settee, a few oil lamps. Through an open doorway, she could see what must be the bedroom, and her face heated at the thought of sharing that space with this man she had just met. "I have a spare room upstairs that I use for storage," Kendrick said, apparently reading her thoughts. "I can clear it out and make it up for you if you want your own space. I will not expect anything from you, Beatrice, not until you are ready. The marriage can be in name only for as long as you need." Beatrice turned to look at him, this stranger who had called her beautiful and who was now offering her kindness she had never expected. "That is very generous of you." "It is common decency," Kendrick said. "You have traveled a long way to marry a man you have never met. I would be a poor excuse for a husband if I made you uncomfortable in your own home." "Your own home." The words settled over Beatrice like a warm shawl, and for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. That evening, Kendrick made them a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, apologizing for his limited cooking skills. Beatrice ate gratefully, suddenly ravenous after the long day of travel. They talked about practical matters, the routine of the ranch, the hired hand named Miguel, who came in 3 days a week to help with the heavy work, the chickens she would be responsible for, the garden that had gone somewhat wild without anyone to tend it. "I have a mare you can ride if you want to learn," Kendrick offered, "or if you just want to explore the land. I know it is different from the city." "I have never ridden a horse," Beatrice admitted, "but I would like to learn." "I will teach you," Kendrick said, and there was that smile again, warm and genuine. "You are beautiful when you look excited about something. Your whole face lights up." Beatrice felt her defenses rise automatically. "Please do not do that." "Do what?" "Say things you do not mean. I understand you are trying to be kind, but I would prefer honesty between us." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Kendrick set down his fork and looked at her directly, his blue-green eyes serious. "Beatrice, I am being honest. I think you are beautiful. I thought so the moment I saw you on that platform, and I think so now. I do not know who told you otherwise, but they were wrong." "Everyone has told me otherwise," Beatrice said, and she hated how her voice shook. "My family, my classmates when I was young, the young men who courted my sisters and barely looked at me. I am not fishing for compliments, Kendrick. I am simply stating facts. I have a plain face. I am too tall and too angular, and my features are not delicate or refined. I accepted that a long time ago." Kendrick shook his head slowly. "Then everyone you have known has been blind. You have strong features, yes. You have an interesting face, a face with character. You have eyes that are intelligent and watchful, and a mouth that looks like it was made for smiling, even though I have not seen you smile yet. You are tall and strong, which is exactly what is needed out here. Delicate city flowers wilt in the Arizona sun, Beatrice, but I think you will thrive here. She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, just stared down at her plate and tried to swallow past the sudden lump in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever made her feel like she might be something other than the ugly duckling of her family. That night, Kendrick set up the spare room for her, carrying up a bed frame from one of the outbuildings and making it up with clean sheets. He wished her good night at the door, tipping his hat to her like she was a lady worthy of respect, and Beatrice lay awake for a long time in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch and trying to understand what had happened to her world in the span of a single day. Morning came with roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the uncurtained window. Beatrice washed using the basin Kendrick had left for her and dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had been Margaret's before her sister had declared it out of fashion. She braided her dark hair and pinned it up, wishing she had something prettier to wear for her wedding day, but knowing she did not. Kendrick was waiting for her downstairs, dressed in clean clothes and a newer hat, his hair still damp from washing. He looked nervous, which somehow made Beatrice feel better about her own nervousness. "You look lovely," he said when he saw her, and before she could protest, he held up a hand. "I know you do not want to hear it, but I am going to say it anyway. You look lovely, Beatrice. That blue brings out the color in your eyes." "My eyes are just brown," Beatrice said, but without the sharp edge she had used the night before. "They are brown with flecks of amber," Kendrick corrected. "Like honey held up to the light." The ride back to Old Tucson felt both longer and shorter than it had the day before. Beatrice watched the landscape roll past and tried to prepare herself for becoming Mrs. Kendrick Ellison, for binding her life to this strange, kind man who said things no one had ever said to her before. The church was a simple wooden structure at the edge of town, its white paint peeling slightly in the harsh sun. A young minister with thinning hair and a gentle manner met them at the door, and two women from the town served as witnesses, casting curious glances at Beatrice, but saying nothing unkind. The ceremony itself was brief and practical, no music or flowers or lengthy speeches. Beatrice repeated her vows in a voice that barely shook, and Kendrick repeated his in a steady tone that somehow made the words feel real and binding. When the minister told him he could kiss his bride, Kendrick leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her cheek, his lips warm and soft against her skin. "Hello, Mrs. Ellison," he murmured, and Beatrice felt the reality of it wash over her. She was married. She was a wife. She belonged somewhere now, to someone, even if it was just a legal arrangement. They signed the papers in the minister's office, and then they were walking back out into the bright Arizona morning, married, bound together by law and church and mutual need. "Are you hungry?" Kendrick asked as they climbed back into the wagon. "There is a restaurant in town that serves decent food, if you want to have a wedding breakfast." Beatrice nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her emotions felt too close to the surface, too raw and exposed. She had not expected to feel anything on her wedding day except perhaps relief at securing her future. She had not expected this strange, fluttering warmth in her chest every time Kendrick looked at her with those honest eyes. The restaurant was small and crowded, filled with ranchers and miners and the occasional family from town. Kendrick found them a table in the corner and ordered eggs and bacon and coffee that came strong and black. Beatrice ate mechanically, aware of the curious glances from other diners, but trying to ignore them. "People are staring," she said quietly. Kendrick glanced around the room and shrugged. "Let them stare. They are probably just curious about the new Mrs. Ellison. You are the most beautiful woman in the room, so of course they are looking." "Kendrick, please," Beatrice said, exasperated. "You do not need to keep saying that." "I am going to say it every day," Kendrick replied calmly, taking a sip of his coffee. "Every single day, Beatrice, I am going to tell you that you are beautiful until you start believing it yourself. That is my job as your husband, to remind you of the truth you have forgotten. I never knew that truth, Beatrice whispered. How can I forget something I never had? Then I will teach it to you, Kendrick said, and the certainty in his voice made her breath catch. I will teach you to see yourself the way I see you. It may take time, but we have time now. We have the rest of our lives. The ride back to the ranch felt different as a married woman. The landscape seemed more vivid somehow, the sky bluer, the air clearer. Or perhaps it was just that Beatrice felt untethered from her old life in a way she had not quite managed the day before. She was Mrs. Ellison now. This was her home. This strange, kind man beside her was her husband. When they arrived back at the ranch, Kendrick helped her down from the wagon and then did something unexpected. He scooped her up in his arms, making her yelp in surprise, and carried her across the threshold of the house, grinning at her startled expression. It is tradition, he said as he set her down gently in the main room. I could not let my beautiful bride walk into her new home on our wedding day. What would people say? There is no one here to see, Beatrice pointed out, but she could not quite suppress the smile that tugged at her lips. I saw, Kendrick said, and that is what matters. Over the following days, Beatrice settled into the rhythms of ranch life with a determination born from years of being told she was only good for domestic work. If that was all she had to offer, then by God, she would be excellent at it. She scrubbed the house from top to bottom, aired out the musty curtains she found stored in a trunk, planted a vegetable garden in the plot behind the house. She learned to manage the chickens and collect eggs, to churn butter, to make bread that rose properly in the dry heat. And every day, Kendrick told her she was beautiful. He said it in the morning when she came downstairs with her hair still braided for sleep. He said it at noon when she brought him lunch in the fields, her face flushed from the heat and her dress dusty from work. He said it in the evening when they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, her hands rough from labor and her skin tanned from the relentless Arizona sun. You are beautiful when you laugh at my terrible jokes, he said one evening as they shelled peas together. You are beautiful when you are concentrating on your sewing, he said another day, watching her mend one of his shirts. You are beautiful when you are angry at the chickens for not laying, he said with a grin after she spent 10 minutes muttering about stubborn hens. At first, Beatrice brushed off his words, deflected them, changed the subject, but Kendrick was persistent in the gentle, patient way he approached everything. He never pushed, never demanded, just kept offering these small observations like gifts she did not know what to do with. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift inside her. It started small. She caught herself checking her reflection in the window one morning and noticing that the Arizona sun had brought out a spray of freckles across her nose that were not entirely unappealing. She realized that her body, which had always felt too angular and awkward in Boston, was actually well suited to the physical work of the ranch. She was strong enough to haul water, to lift heavy baskets, to work alongside Kendrick in the garden without tiring. One afternoon, Miguel, the hired hand, arrived to help Kendrick mend a section of fence. He was a man in his 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes, and he spoke to Beatrice in careful English, complimenting her on the improvements she had made to the house and grounds. Boss is a lucky man, Miguel said with a knowing smile. He was living like a bachelor too long. It's good he found such a fine woman. Beatrice felt her cheeks heat, but instead of immediately denying the compliment, she found herself saying, "Thank you. That is kind of you to say." Kendrick overheard and gave her one of his warm smiles, the kind that crinkled his eyes and made her stomach do strange, fluttering things. I am a lucky man, he agreed. The luckiest. A month into their marriage, Kendrick began teaching Beatrice to ride. He saddled the gentle mare he had mentioned, a sweet-tempered creature named Daisy, with a soft brown coat and patient eyes. Beatrice had been nervous, but Kendrick stood close, his hand steadying her as she mounted, his voice calm and encouraging. Just relax and move with her, he instructed. Daisy knows what she is doing. Trust her, and trust yourself. They started in the corral, walking in slow circles until Beatrice felt more confident. Then they ventured out onto the open range, Kendrick riding beside her on his tall gelding, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the land. When I first came here, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in my life, he said, as they paused on a rise overlooking his property. Back in Kansas, everyone knew my father was a drunk who gambled away everything we had. Everyone knew our family was barely scraping by. I was always the poor kid, the one people pitied or looked down on. But here, I could be anyone I wanted to be. I could build something that was mine, that I earned with my own hands. Beatrice understood that feeling more than he knew. Is that why you did not want to marry someone from town? Because they might know your history? Partly, Kendrick admitted, but also because I wanted someone who was coming here for the same reason I did. Someone who wanted a fresh start, a chance to be something other than what everyone expected. And have I lived up to your expectations? The question came out before Beatrice could stop it, vulnerable and a little afraid. Kendrick turned in his saddle to look at her fully, his expression serious. You have exceeded every expectation I had, Beatrice. You have made this house a home. You have worked harder than any woman I have ever known. You have been patient with me and kind, even when I know this must all be strange and overwhelming. He paused, and something flickered in his eyes. And you are more beautiful every day, not just in how you look, though you truly are lovely, but in who you are, in your strength and your determination and your goodness. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back quickly. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why do you keep saying these things? Because they are true, Kendrick said simply, and because I suspect no one has ever said them to you before, and that is a crime that needs correcting. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, but Beatrice felt something fundamental shifting in her chest, some old, scarred over wound beginning to crack open. It hurt, this slow awakening to the possibility that she might be worth something after all. But it was a good hurt, like blood returning to a limb that had been numb too long. That evening, after supper, Kendrick asked if she would like to sit on the porch with him. They had fallen into this habit over the past weeks, spending the hour before full dark together, watching the sky change colors and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. I want to tell you something, Kendrick said after a long, comfortable silence. But I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated in any way. Beatrice felt her heart rate pick up. All right. He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. I am falling in love with you, Beatrice. Maybe I already have fallen. I am not entirely sure. I know we have only been married a month, and I know this started as a practical arrangement, but I need you to know that it is not practical anymore. Not for me. You are not just my wife in name. You are the person I look forward to seeing every morning and the person I think about when I am out in the fields. You make me laugh, and you make me want to be a better man, and I think you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. Beatrice stared at him, her mind reeling. You barely know me. I know enough, Kendrick said. I know you sing when you think no one can hear you. I know you are kind to the animals, even when they are being difficult. I know you have been hurt, and you have every reason to be bitter and closed off, but instead, you are generous and open and willing to give this strange life a chance. I know that when you finally smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming out from behind clouds. I do not know what to say, Beatrice whispered. You do not need to say anything, Kendrick assured her. I am not asking you to feel the same way. I just needed you to know the truth. I am not saying these things about your beauty because I am being polite or because I think it is my duty as your husband. I am saying them because when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary, and I cannot help but tell you so. Beatrice felt a tear slip down her cheek, and then another. 24 years of being told she was not enough, that she was the plain one, the unfortunate one, the one who should be grateful for scraps. And here was this man, this good, honest man telling her she was extraordinary. Hey, Kendrick said gently, reaching out to brush the tears from her face with his thumb. I did not mean to make you cry. These are good tears, Beatrice managed. I think, I am not entirely sure. I do not know what to do with good tears. Kendrick smiled, soft and understanding. You do not need to do anything with them. Just let them be. They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, vast and bright in the clear desert sky. Beatrice felt the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble, brick by careful brick. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Over the next weeks, Beatrice found herself watching Kendrick with new eyes. She noticed the way he was always gentle with the animals, even when they were being stubborn. She saw how he treated Miguel with respect, paying him fairly and listening to his advice about the ranch. She observed his patience, his steady humor, his willingness to work from sunup to sundown without complaint. And she began to notice the way he looked at her, like she was something precious, something worth treasuring. One afternoon, Beatrice was working in the garden when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Kendrick riding in with another man, someone she did not recognize. They dismounted at the barn, and Beatrice watched as they talked, their conversation seeming serious. When Kendrick came to the house later, he looked troubled. Is something wrong? Beatrice asked, setting aside the beans she had been snapping. Maybe, Kendrick admitted. That was Frank Morrison from the neighboring ranch. He says there have been some cattle rustlers working in the area. Several ranchers have lost stock in the past month. He wanted to warn me to keep an eye out. Beatrice felt a chill despite the heat. She had heard stories about rustlers and outlaws in the West, though she had hoped they were exaggerated. Is it dangerous? It can be, Kendrick said honestly. But I will be careful. Miguel and I will take turns keeping watch at night for a while, just to be safe. He must have seen the worry on her face, because he crossed the room and took her hands in his. I will be fine, Beatrice, I promise. But I need you to promise me something too. What? If you ever hear anything suspicious at night, or if anyone comes to the house when I am not here, I want you to take the rifle I keep by the door and go upstairs. Lock yourself in the bedroom and do not come out until you know it is safe. Do you understand? Beatrice nodded, her mouth dry. I understand. Good. Kendrick squeezed her hands gently. I do not mean to frighten you. I just want you to be prepared. You are my wife, Beatrice, and it is my job to keep you safe. But I need you to be smart and careful, too. I will be, Beatrice promised. That night, Kendrick took first watch, sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees. Beatrice tried to sleep but found herself lying awake, listening to every creak and rustle, her nerves stretched taut. She kept thinking about Kendrick out there in the dark, watching for danger, and realized with a sudden clarity that the thought of something happening to him made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with practical concerns about her future. She cared about him, truly cared, in a way that went beyond gratitude or companionship. When had that happened? When had this arrangement of convenience become something real? The rustlers struck a week later, but not at their ranch. Frank Morrison lost 30 head of cattle in the night, and the entire area was on edge. Kendrick and Miguel increased their patrols, and Beatrice took to keeping the rifle close, her nerves jangling every time she heard an unexpected sound. One evening, as they were finishing supper, they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. Kendrick was on his feet immediately, gesturing for Beatrice to get back. But when he looked out the window, his posture relaxed slightly. It is the sheriff and a posse, he said. They must be tracking the rustlers. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom Hackett with a silver star pinned to his vest, accepted Kendrick's offer of water for his men and information about what they had seen. He warned them to stay vigilant, said the rustlers were a gang of 4 men who had been working their way through the territory for months. We will catch them, Sheriff Hackett said with grim certainty. But until we do, keep your eyes open and your guns loaded." After they left, Kendrick closed and barred the door, something he had never done before. Beatrice could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. "Come here," she said softly, surprising herself. Kendrick turned to look at her, and she held out her hand. After a moment, he crossed to her and took it, letting her pull him down to sit beside her on the settee. "You are worried," Beatrice said. "It was not a question. I am worried about keeping you safe," Kendrick admitted. "About keeping the ranch safe. I have worked so hard to build this place, Beatrice, and now you are here, and you have made it a real home, and the thought of someone threatening you." "I am not fragile," Beatrice said. "I know everyone has always treated me like I am something pitiable, something that needs to be handled carefully. But I am stronger than people think. If trouble comes, I will not fall apart." Kendrick looked at her, really looked at her, and something like pride shone in his eyes. "I know you are strong. I have seen it every day since you arrived. You are possibly the strongest person I have ever met, Beatrice. You have survived years of people telling you that you were less than you are, and you are still kind and open and willing to try. That takes a strength most people cannot imagine." "You see me," Beatrice said, the words catching in her throat. "You really see me?" "Kendrick. Not what people told you I was, not what I was supposed to be. Just me." "I see you," Kendrick agreed softly. "And what I see is beautiful. What I see is extraordinary." Beatrice leaned forward and kissed him. It was the first time she had initiated any physical contact between them, and she felt him go still with surprise before his arms came around her, gentle but sure. The kiss was sweet and warm, full of promise, and when they pulled apart, both of them were breathing a little harder. "I think I am falling in love with you too," Beatrice whispered. "I did not expect it. I came here thinking this would be a practical arrangement, a way to secure my future. But you have been so patient and kind, and you have made me feel things I never thought I would feel. I look forward to seeing you every day. I miss you when you are out in the fields. And when you tell me I am beautiful, I am starting to almost believe it." Kendrick cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Believe it, Beatrice. You are beautiful and you are loved, and you are exactly where you are meant to be." They sat together on the settee until the fire burned down to embers, just holding each other, and Beatrice felt something in her chest that she finally recognized as happiness. The rustlers were caught 3 days later, cornered in a canyon by Sheriff Hackett and his posse. The news spread through the ranching community like wildfire, and the relief was palpable. Kendrick came home that evening with a lightness in his step that had been missing for weeks, and he swept Beatrice up in his arms and spun her around the kitchen, laughing. "It is over," he said. "We are safe. The ranch is safe." "I am glad," Beatrice said, laughing with him, dizzy from the spinning and the joy in his eyes. "Put me down before you drop me." "I would never drop you," Kendrick said, but he set her down gently, his hands lingering on her waist. "You are far too precious." That night, Beatrice moved her belongings from the spare room upstairs to the bedroom she should have been sharing with her husband all along. Kendrick said nothing, just helped her carry her things, but the look in his eyes made her feel warm all over. They lay together that night as husband and wife in truth, and Kendrick was as gentle and patient as he had been with everything else, murmuring to her in the darkness about how beautiful she was, how perfect, how loved, and for the first time in her life, Beatrice believed it. The months that followed were the happiest Beatrice had ever known. Summer mellowed into fall, bringing cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing the ranch for winter. Beatrice learned to preserve food, to can vegetables and fruits, to smoke meat. She sewed warm quilts for their bed and curtains for every window. She learned to ride well enough to accompany Kendrick on his rounds of the ranch, and they would sometimes stop on a high ridge just to look out over the land they were building together. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Beatrice said, I received a letter from my mother today. Kendrick looked at her, his expression careful. What did she say? She wanted to know if I was managing all right, if you were treating me well, if I had settled into my duties as a wife. Beatrice paused, choosing her words carefully. She said she hoped I was not expecting more from marriage than was realistic for someone like me. Someone like you, Kendrick repeated, and there was an edge to his voice. Meaning what exactly? Meaning someone plain, someone who should be grateful for practical kindness and not hope for romance or love. Beatrice looked down at her hands, rough now from work, but somehow more her own than they had ever been in Boston. I wrote her back. I told her I was very happy, that my husband treats me with respect and affection, and that I have found a life here that suits me far better than anything I left behind. That is all true, Kendrick said. I know. Beatrice smiled, and it felt natural now. Easy. I also told her that you tell me I am beautiful every single day, and that I am beginning to believe you mean it. Kendrick reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Of course I mean it. You are beautiful, Beatrice. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, inside and out, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget it. I think that might take a while, Beatrice said honestly. 24 years of believing one thing does not disappear in a few months. Then it is a good thing we have the rest of our lives, Kendrick said, echoing the words he had spoken in the restaurant on their wedding day. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had become her anchor in this new life. Winter came to Arizona in the form of cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Nothing like the harsh Boston winters Beatrice remembered, but enough to make the work different. They spent more time indoors, and Beatrice taught Kendrick some of the card games her father had loved. He taught her to play the harmonica he kept in a drawer, and although she was terrible at it, he laughed with her rather than at her and said her mistakes were charming. Everything about you is charming, he insisted when she protested. Even your truly awful harmonica playing. I am beginning to think you would find me charming, even if I sprouted horns and a tail, Beatrice said, shaking her head, but unable to suppress her smile. Absolutely, Kendrick agreed. You would be the most beautiful devil in all of Arizona. In December, they rode into Old Tucson for supplies and found the town preparing for Christmas. Beatrice had not thought much about the holiday, but Kendrick insisted on buying her a length of beautiful green fabric that matched her eyes and a set of hair combs made of polished wood that he said would look lovely against her dark hair. You do not need to buy me things, Beatrice protested, even as she ran her fingers over the smooth combs. I want to, Kendrick said. I want to give you everything you never had, everything you deserve. Let me spoil you a little, Beatrice. It makes me happy. They spent Christmas Day at the ranch, just the two of them, and it was perfect in its simplicity. Beatrice cooked a chicken with all the trimmings, and Kendrick presented her with a wooden box he had carved himself, inlaid with her initials. Inside were letters, she discovered. All the letters he had written to her during their correspondence before she came to Arizona, along with her responses that she had thought he would have thrown away. I kept them, Kendrick said when he saw her surprise. I kept every word you wrote to me because even then I could see who you really were. You were honest and clever and brave enough to take a chance on a stranger. I knew I was lucky when you agreed to come. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears now, the kind she was learning to accept. I was the lucky one, she said softly. You saved me, Kendrick. You gave me a home and a life and made me believe I was worth something. You were always worth something, Kendrick corrected gently. I just helped you see it. Spring arrived with wildflowers, carpeting the desert in colors Beatrice had never imagined possible, and she spent hours walking through them, marveling at the beauty of this land that had become hers. The ranch was thriving, the cattle healthy and multiplying, and Kendrick was talking about expanding their herd, maybe buying some of the adjacent land. We could build something really significant here, he said one evening as they planned for the future. Not just for us, but for our children someday. Children. The word sent a thrill through Beatrice, half excitement and half terror. Do you want children? With you? Yes, Kendrick said without hesitation. I want to see your eyes in our daughter's face, your strength in our son's character. I want to build a family with you, Beatrice. A family where no one is ever told they are plain or not good enough. A family where everyone knows they are loved and valued exactly as they are. That sounds wonderful, Beatrice whispered. In May, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She waited a few weeks to be certain before telling Kendrick, nervous about his reaction, even though she knew it was foolish to be nervous. When she finally told him over breakfast one morning, stumbling over the words, his face transformed with joy, so complete it took her breath away. Really? You are certain? As certain as I can be without a doctor, Beatrice said. I thought we could ride into town next week and have it confirmed. Kendrick came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. We are going to have a baby. We are going to be parents. Are you happy? Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. I am the happiest man alive, Kendrick said, and you are the most beautiful pregnant woman in all of Arizona, possibly in all the world. Beatrice laughed, feeling lighter than air. You cannot possibly tell yet. I do not even show. I can tell, Kendrick insisted. You have a glow about you. You are radiant. The doctor in Old Tucson confirmed what Beatrice already knew and predicted the baby would arrive in late January or early February. Kendrick treated her like precious china for weeks until Beatrice finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not dying, and perfectly capable of continuing her normal work around the ranch. But what if you overexert yourself? Kendrick fretted. What if something happens? Then we will deal with it, Beatrice said firmly. But wrapping me in cotton wool and not letting me do anything is going to drive me mad. I need to stay busy, Kendrick. I need to feel useful. They compromised. Beatrice continued her normal routine, but let Kendrick and Miguel take over the heaviest tasks. She focused on preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and setting up a cradle in their bedroom that Kendrick built with his own hands. He carved animals into the headboard, each one perfectly detailed, and Beatrice ran her fingers over them and thought about how lucky their child would be to have this man as a father. As her belly grew, Kendrick adapted his daily compliments to include the changes in her body. He told her she was beautiful with her hand resting on her swelling stomach. He told her she was glowing when she was flushed from the heat and feeling anything but glowing. He told her she was the most gorgeous woman in Arizona when she was 8 months pregnant and waddling like a duck and ready to never be pregnant again. You are impossible, she told him, but she was smiling. I am honest, Kendrick corrected. There is a difference. Their son arrived on a cold night in late January, after 12 hours of labor that left Beatrice exhausted but elated. Kendrick had ridden into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who had delivered half the babies in the territory, and he had paced outside the bedroom door until Mrs. Fletcher finally called him in to meet his child. You have a son, Beatrice said, her voice hoarse but happy, and Kendrick crossed the room in 3 long strides to kneel beside the bed, staring down at the tiny bundle in her arms with wonder in his eyes. He is perfect, Kendrick breathed. He looks just like you. He looks like a wrinkled little old man, Beatrice said with a tired laugh, but I love him more than I knew it was possible to love anyone except you. They named him James after Kendrick's grandfather, and he had Beatrice's dark hair and Kendrick's blue-green eyes. He was a healthy baby with strong lungs, and he transformed their lives in ways both exhausting and wonderful. Beatrice threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she had brought to every other aspect of her life. But there were nights when she felt overwhelmed, when James would not stop crying and she could not figure out what he needed. On those nights, Kendrick would take the baby and walk with him, pacing the house in the darkness, singing off key lullabies until James finally settled. You are an amazing mother, Kendrick would tell her afterward as she lay exhausted in their bed. You are patient and loving and devoted. Our son is lucky to have you. I am a mess, Beatrice protested. I have not slept properly in weeks, and I cannot remember the last time I combed my hair, and I am fairly certain I have spit up on every dress I own. You are beautiful, Kendrick said, as he always did. You are beautiful when you are covered in spit up and exhausted and doing the hardest work in the world. You are beautiful because you love our son with your whole heart and you love me and you keep showing up every day even when it is hard. How do you always know the right thing to say? Beatrice asked, tears leaking from her eyes because she was too tired to hold them back. I just tell you the truth, Kendrick said simply, gathering her into his arms. The truth is you are extraordinary, Beatrice Ellison, and I fall more in love with you every single day. James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby baby who smiled at everything and everyone, particularly his father. Kendrick was devoted to his son in a way that made Beatrice's heart ache with love. He would come in from working in the fields and scoop James up, dancing around the kitchen with him while Beatrice cooked dinner, making up silly songs that had no melody but made the baby laugh. When James was 6 months old, Beatrice received another letter from her mother, this one congratulating her on the birth of her son and including a photograph of Margaret's 3 daughters and Charlotte's new twin boys. The letter was polite but distant, and Beatrice realized as she read it that she felt no particular connection to these people anymore. They were her family in name, but this ranch, this house, Kendrick and James, this was her real family now. Do you miss Boston? Kendrick asked that evening as they sat on the porch, James sleeping in his arms. Beatrice considered the question honestly. I miss very little of it. Maybe the theaters occasionally, the libraries, but the people, the life I had there? No, I was never really myself in Boston. I was always trying to be smaller, quieter, less of who I was, so people would not notice me and find more reasons to criticize. Here I can be myself. Here I can take up space. You take up exactly the right amount of space, Kendrick said, and you make that space beautiful just by being in it. The years that followed were full ones. James grew into a sturdy toddler who loved following his father around the ranch, trying to help with chores in ways that were more hindrance than help, but that Kendrick never discouraged. When James was 2, they had a daughter, a tiny thing with Beatrice's brown eyes and a serious expression that made everyone who met her smile. They named her Anne after Beatrice's grandmother, and she proved to have a will of iron from the very start. She is definitely your daughter, Kendrick said with amusement, one afternoon after Anne had spent 20 minutes refusing to take a nap. Stubborn and strong, and absolutely determined to do things her own way. Is that a compliment? Beatrice asked, though she was smiling. Always, Kendrick said. I would not want you any other way. The ranch continued to prosper. Kendrick bought the adjacent land and expanded their herd, and they hired 2 more hands to help with the increased work. The house grew too, with a new wing that added bedrooms for the children and a proper dining room for when they had guests. Beatrice hung curtains in every window and planted flowers around the porch, and the place that had once been just a functional ranch house became a real home, full of life and laughter. One evening, when James was 5 and Anne was 3, and Beatrice was pregnant again with their 3rd child, she and Kendrick sat on the porch as they always did, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Do you remember what you said to me when I first arrived? Beatrice asked. On the platform in Old Tucson? I said you were beautiful, Kendrick replied, and I have been saying it every day since. You have, Beatrice agreed. And somewhere along the way, I started believing you, not just accepting the words, but really believing them. I look in the mirror now, and I do not see the ugly girl my family always told me I was. I see someone who is strong and capable and loved. I see someone who has built a life she is proud of. I see someone who is beautiful, Not because her features are perfect, but because she is happy. Kendrick reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. You were always beautiful, Beatrice, but I am glad you can finally see it for yourself. That is all I ever wanted, for you to see yourself the way I have always seen you. You saved me, Beatrice said softly. You saved me from a life where I never would have known joy or love or what it felt like to belong somewhere. We saved each other, Kendrick corrected. I was lonely and adrift before you came. You gave me a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a family, a real home. You taught me that taking a chance on someone, on being vulnerable enough to love, is always worth the risk. Their third child, another son they named Michael, arrived in the spring, and their fourth, a daughter named Sarah, came 2 years later. The house was always full of noise and chaos, children running in and out, dogs barking, chickens squawking in protest when the little ones chased them. It was exhausting and wonderful, and everything Beatrice had never let herself dream of having. When James was 12, he asked his mother one evening why she sometimes touched her face like she was surprised to find it there. Beatrice had not realized she still did that, the old habit of checking to make sure she was real, that this life was real. When I was young, people told me I was plain, Beatrice said honestly, because she had always promised herself she would never lie to her children. They told me I was not beautiful, that I should not expect much from life. And I believed them for a very long time. Your father was the first person who ever told me I was beautiful, and he said it every single day until I finally believed him. Sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is my life, that I am this happy, so I have to remind myself it is real. You are beautiful, Mama, James said with the absolute certainty of a child. Everyone thinks so. Thank you, sweetheart, Beatrice said, pulling him close. But what matters is that I think so now. What matters is that I know my worth, and I am teaching all of you to know yours too. No one gets to tell you what you are worth. You decide that for yourself. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Beatrice and Kendrick grew old together in the way of people who have chosen each other and keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year. Their hair grayed, their faces lined, their bodies slowed. But Kendrick never stopped telling Beatrice she was beautiful. He said it when they were in their 40s and their children were growing into adults. He said it when they were in their 50s and became grandparents for the first time. He said it when they were in their 60s and their grandchildren ran wild through the ranch house just as their own children had once done. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full to bursting with family, and there was food and music and dancing on the porch as the sun set over the land that Beatrice and Kendrick had built together. As the evening wound down and the younger children were put to bed, Beatrice and Kendrick slipped away to their spot on the porch, the place where they had spent countless evenings over the decades. 40 years, Beatrice said, shaking her head in wonder. I can hardly believe it has been 40 years since I stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and certain I was making a mistake. Best day of my life when you arrived, Kendrick said. His voice was rougher now with age, but his eyes still held the same warmth, the same certainty they had always held. Best decision I ever made, answering your advertisement. I think I am the one who benefited most from that decision, Beatrice said. You gave me everything, Kendrick. A home, a family, a life worth living. You taught me to see myself differently. You did that yourself, Kendrick said. I just reminded you of what was already there. You were always strong, always beautiful, always worthy of love. You just needed someone to see it and reflect it back to you until you could see it for yourself. Beatrice leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders the way he had done thousands of times before. Inside the house, she could hear their family, their children and grandchildren, the legacy of this life they had built together. Outside, the Arizona sky was doing what it always did, painting itself in colors that should not be possible but somehow were. You are beautiful, Kendrick murmured, and 40 years of hearing those words had not diminished their power. If anything, they meant more now, weighted with decades of love and partnership and choosing each other every single day. I know, Beatrice said, and she meant it. She finally, truly meant it. And so are you. They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something extraordinary from a simple arrangement, and a cowboy who refused to stop telling his mail-order bride she was beautiful. The ranch would continue after them, passed down through their children. The house would stand, full of memories and love, and the echoes of all the laughter that had filled it over the years. And somewhere in the future, their great-grandchildren would hear the story of how their great-grandmother Beatrice came west to marry a stranger, expecting nothing, and found everything. But that was all still to come. For now there was just this moment, this perfect moment, two old people who had loved each other well and thoroughly, sitting together in the Arizona evening and watching the stars come out. Kendrick told her she was beautiful one more time, because some habits were too precious to break, and Beatrice smiled and kissed him and believed it with her whole heart.